Could your congressman pass an FBI security check? That's the question that Trevor Loudon asks in his new film, The Enemies Within, based off of his book with the same title, The Enemies Within, Communists, Socialists, and Progressives in the U.S. Congress. Loudon's film exposes the far-left, outright Marxist, Leninist, and Islamic connections of various members of the U.S. Congress. Trevor, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Great to be here, Christian. Thanks for having me.
So, Trevor, I'd like to ask you, when did you get started in this interest in communism?
Look, it really started back, I've got to say, reading in New Zealand, reading JBS literature back in the early 70s. I read books like The Naked Communist by Cleon Skousen and several books recommended or published by the JBS. But it really became personal for me in 1984 when we elected a socialist Labour government in my country. And one of the very first things they did was to ban nuclear warships from our harbours. Now, we had a military alliance with the United States up to that point, the Australia-New Zealand-United States Military Alliance, ANZUS. And there was a very strong pro-American feeling because we had been saved during World War II from invasion by the Japanese, by the US military. So they banned nuclear warships, it destroyed the alliance with the United States, and there was a lot of debate in the papers at the time. Oh, the peace movement are communist, they're working at the behest of Moscow, they want to drive a wedge in the Western alliance. And of course the peace movement would say, no, we just love peace, we want an independent foreign policy for New Zealand. We don't want nuclear war. We want our kids to live free. And so a friend of mine who was one of the early computer geeks, we went down together and we went to the local library and poured through all the peace movement publications and put the names on a database. Then we went down to the library and found the Communist Party publications and got all the bylines and all the names, and we put those in a database. And guess what? There were matches all over the place.
So these are communist front groups posing
as completely communist
peace organizations. What led you to transfer your research from communism infiltrating New Zealand to the United States?
Well, as my friend would always say, you know, that the Soviets always regarded the United States as the #1 enemy. Everything else was peripheral. If you're going to get world domination, you have to take down America. There was no two ways about it. And he said an interesting thing. He said, back in the Cold War, no American was allowed to train at the Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning. Your government had warned Moscow, had any Americans ever been caught training there, there would be war. And the Soviets respected that. But what they would do is train Canadians or Mexicans who would then go and train the American communists. So I started investigating the American Democratic Party, the Communist parties here, and when I was doing that in March 2007, I discovered a document that was talking about a Hawaiian communist named Frank Marshall Davis and his links with a young black guy in Hawaii called Barack Obama.
That sounds familiar.
It sounds very familiar. And the context of this article, they talked about how this meeting, this relationship would be reviewed by historians in future times as very significant. Now, this was early 2007. Obama was just a blip on the radar at that point. You know, he wasn't anywhere near the Democratic Party nomination, but I knew from that point that he was going to likely be the nominee because the communists were clearly sending a message to their people, he is our chosen one. We're going to back this man. Hillary Clinton's going to be sidelined and this is going to happen. And sure enough, it came to pass.
So what do you make of the mainstream media and the left's obsession and fascination that President Trump has alleged ties with Russia, that he is a puppet of Putin?
Well, the Russians certainly tried to get people around him, like Carter Page and others who had deep ties to the Russians. And Trump very wisely got rid of those people. So I think that's great. But see, you know, what did Lenin say? What did Alinsky say? Criticize others for what you're doing yourself. The Democrats have been in bed with the Soviet Union and Russia for more than 50 years. They have been working with the Russians to influence elections in this country for decades. You know, Hillary Clinton was so in bed with the Russians through the Skolkovo Foundation, it's just unbelievable. So what do? We are totally guilty of Russian associations. So let's call out Trump for doing it. Put all the attention on him, take the attention off us, and we look really cool. We're national security hawks now. We're standing up for America against Vladimir Putin, when they've been in bed with Vladimir Putin and his predecessors for 50 years now. You know, it's the ultimate scam. It's the ultimate.
If Hillary had
con
won,
game.
it would have been actually worse, because she was behind the New START treaty that benefited
Absolutely,
Moscow,
yeah.
and the uranium deal that you mentioned. So Hillary's ties with Putin are far deeper,
far deeper, and far more dangerous, and I would say illegal. You know, Barack Obama's ties. You know, he was mentored by Frank Marshall Davis, a pro-Soviet patriot. He got his first job in the Illinois State Senate through his pro-Soviet mentor, Alice Palmer, who was a member of the World Peace Council, the International Organization of Journalists, and other Soviet fronts. He had pro-Soviet people around him his entire career. And that famous statement that he made in South Korea when he was caught off mic with Dmitry Medvedev, the Russian president, "When I get re-elected, I'll have more flexibility to deal with you." And Medvedev says, "Yes, I understand. We will pass your message on to Vladimir. We are with you." Now, you compare that to Donald Trump's alleged ties. That is an open admission that Barack Obama was basically talking to his bosses. And the media, "Oh, that's okay. That's nothing to worry about, nothing to see here." So this is the mainstream media in this country. The mainstream media is so in the tank for the left. They will follow the leftist line anyway. They have no credibility left. The media in this country has been in the tank for the communists and the Russians since the post-war era.
And if people want to learn more about this, they can pick up your movie, The Enemies Within, now on DVD. Now, if I may ask one last question, what's next on your agenda? What's the next project you're working on that you want to admit to, at least in this interview at the moment?
Well, look, we're doing a short movie right now on Antifa, the radical thugs that you see beating up people on the streets of Berkeley, etc. But the really important project, we want to do a series of Enemies Within movies. We've done one on Congress and the Senate, but that's not the only problem area in American life. So we're seeking funding now. We're looking for funding because the next project we want to do is Enemies Within the churches. We want to look very directly at the communist, Marxist and socialist infiltration of the mainstream and even some of the evangelical churches in this country, exposing their ties way back to the communist movement, the historical context of this, but right to the current day and the way they have perverted Christian teachings. They have placed their people in key posts in theological colleges, etc., and are basically working to bring the churches under communist control, just like the Russian Orthodox Church and the Islamic mosques have been brought under control inside Russia.